Confirmation of the letters of Nicholas V and Callist III. Sixtus Bishop, servant of the servants of God, for an everlasting record of the matter. By the eternal King's mercy, through which kings rule, we, having been gathered in the supreme watchtower of the apostolic seat, strive for the status and prosperity, as well as the repose and tranquility of all Catholic kings, under whose happy governance those faithful to Christ are incubated in justice and peace. And we fervently long for the charms of peace to flourish among them. And as to these things which we find to have been prudently enacted by our predecessor Roman pontiffs, and others, for this end, that they might endure perpetually firm and unspoiled, and emerge far from all shadow of doubt, agreeably displaying the robustness of apostolic confirmation. It has been some time since it was brought to the attention of our predecessor, Pope Nicholas V of happy memory, that, at one time, Henry, the infant of Portugal, illustrious uncle of our most beloved son in Christ Alfonso, king of the kingdoms of Portugal and Algarve, following in the footsteps of John of bright memory, king of the said kingdoms, his progenitor, and being maximally kindled by zeal for the salvation of souls and by the ardor of faith, just like a true and Catholic soldier of Christ, creator of all things, and being the keenest and strongest defender of, and a fearless fist-fighter for, that very faith, aspiring with all his might from his earliest age to worship the most glorious name of that same Creator, that it, not to mention his life-giving act by which we are redeemed, be spread and exalted throughout the entire terrestrial sphere, even in the remotest and unknown places, brought many treacherous Muslims, as well as many other infidels, into the fold of the true faith. After the city of Ceuta, existing in Africa, had been brought under the dominion of the said King John, and after many wars had been waged by the very infant, in the name, however, of the said king, against the aforesaid enemies and infidels, sometimes even in person himself, and not without greatest labors and expenses, and dangers and losses of things and persons, and the slaughter of a great deal of his own subjects, being neither broken nor frightened by so many and such great labors, dangers, and casualties against them, but burning all the more for such a praiseworthy and pious pursuit of his, he populated several solitary islands in the ocean sea with the faithful, and made churches and other pious places to be founded and constructed therein, in which divine duties are even performed, due to the praiseworthy work of the said infant. And through diligent energy, quite a few of the indwellers and inhabitants of the diverse islands existing in said sea, coming to an understanding of the real God, have undergone the sacred baptism, for the praise and glory of the actual God, and the salvation of a great many souls, as likewise for the propagation of orthodox faith and the growth of the divine cult. Because of this, since at that time that same infant had reached to great renown that which never before, or at least not within human memory, anyone had been wont to, sailing across such ocean sea towards southern and eastern shores, which for us in the west were completely unknown, such that there were no certain notions to be had concerning the peoples of those parts, believing himself to prove greatest obedience to God in this, if his work and industry might be done throughout that very sea, navigable all the way up to the Indians, who are said to cultivate Christ's name, and if he might be able to coordinate with them and those in support of the Christians against the Muslims, to drive back other such enemies of the faith, and also wipe out a considerable number of Gentiles or pagans overly infected by the sect of the most unholy Muhammad from the peoples existing between here and there right away, and to preach to them the unknown name of the holiest Christ, and also make it to be preached there. The capital, secured in its authority, for the next 25 years after that, never ceased to send out hosts of men composed from the peoples of the said kingdoms, basically every single year, to the sea to be explored, and towards maritime provinces in southern parts, and to the Antarctic pole, with the greatest efforts, risks, and expenses, and in the swiftest ships, called caravels. And in this way it was done, so that with quite a few such ships they had explored and occupied ports, islands, and seas, until eventually they had reached the province of Guinea, having occupied several islands, ports, and also the sea adjacent to this same province. Sailing further, they reached the mouth of a certain great river, commonly known as the Nile, and there it was that a war had broken out, which was maintained against the peoples of those parts throughout some years in the name of the very King Alfonso and that of the infant, and in which quite a few islands in the vicinity were conquered and also peacefully possessed, just as they then continued to be possessed along with the adjacent sea even unto now. Since then as well, many Guineans and other blacks have been captured by force, and some also not by the exchange of forbidden things, but by lawful contract of sale, and sent elsewhere to kingdoms in which they have become converted to the Catholic faith in abundant number. and it was hoped, by the clemency of divine favor, that if such progress had been continued with them, either those peoples would have been converted to the faith, or at least their souls would have been benefited by Christ. And, this being learned by the same predecessor, that although the aforementioned king and infant, who, with so many and such great dangers, labors, and expenses, not to mention the loss of so many of his own men, had made those very provinces to be searched to see to what extent they were relying on aid, and who had acquired and possessed such ports, islands, and seas for those of the true Lord, as stated above, fearing lest someone would have sailed to those parts led by greed, desiring to usurp the completion, profit, and glory of such works for themselves, or at any rate to hinder it, and because of this, either for a convenient opportunity for profit, or else through malice, would carry off or transport iron, arms, bandages, and other such things and goods forbidden to be marketed to the infidels, or else would teach those very infidels the art of sailing, due to which their enemies were made stronger and hardier, that such pursuit would either be impeded or cease by chance, not without great offense to God and enormous dishonor on all Christendom. To obviate the above, and also for the protection of their rights and possessions, they thereafter forbade, under certain most grave express penalties, and established in general, that no one were supposed to sail to the said provinces, or contract in their ports, or fish in the seas there, except with their own sailors and ships, and with the payment of a certain tax, and by obtaining express permission concerning it from the same king or infant beforehand. In the course of time, it would have eventually been able to happen that people of other kingdoms or nations might be led by envy, malice, or greed to enter into the said provinces against the forbiddance, and without such license and payment of the tax, and would in this way dare to sail, contract, and fish in the acquired provinces, ports, islands, and sea. And in this case, supposing that aforesaid, between King Alfonso and the infant, who would no wise suffer themselves to be thus duped, they would be able to follow behind, and quite a bit of ill will, rancor, strife, war, and scandal would have ensued, to God's great disfavor and the peril of souls. The same predecessor, attending to each and every obligation above, and considering by meditation that since he, some time before, granted to the aforesaid King Alfonso, among other things, the opportunity against whatever Muslims and pagans and other enemies of Christ wherever they exist, and also whatever kingdoms, duchies, principalities, dominions, possessions, and movable and immovable goods detained and possessed by them, which are to be invaded, conquered, stormed, vanquished, and subjugated, and whose persons are to be reduced to perpetual servitude, and which kingdoms, duchies, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods are to be applied and appropriated to himself and his successors, and converted into his use and utility, and that of his successors, full and free by his other edicts. Through the pretense of said faculty, the same King Alfonso, or the aforesaid infant through his authority, had justly and legitimately acquired such islands, lands, ports, and seas, had possessed them, and continued to possess them, and they continued to heed and belong to the same King Alfonso and the successors of same according to law. And neither was anyone else faithful to Christ able, except by this special license for King Alfonso and his successors, to licitly involve themselves in those things concerned so far, by any means. He believing that the very King Alfonso and his successors, and the infant through him, had the power to set to work on a work most pious and illustrious, and most worthy of being remembered for all eternity. As indeed they did set to work on it, with the degree of fervency with which the salvation of souls, the growth of the faith, and the repression of its enemies should have been taken care of, and with concern for the subject of the very faith, and of the republic of the universal church which is to be established. Wherefore, any substantial costs of which having been raised, they were able to consider themselves as having been fully protected through the same predecessor, and through the apostolic seat, and by graces, most fully informed concerning each and every point of the above. By his own motion, and by mature deliberation previously held on the above beforehand, by apostolic authority, and out of the certain knowledge from the fullness of apostolic power, he wished to have the points of the aforesaid letters of ability inserted word for word, with each and every one of the clauses contained therein extended by whatever means to Ceuta and the aforesaid places, and whatever other places acquired before the date of the said letters of ability, and to the provinces, islands, ports, and seas which would afterwards be acquired out of the hands of the infidels or pagans through the name of the said King Alfonso and his successors, and of the infant, in those very, and also the surrounding, areas, and in further and remoter parts. And those places already acquired under the same faculty, and by the vigor of the said letters, and those which would have happened to be acquired afterwards, since they would have been acquired for the aforesaid king and his successors, and also the infant, we declared that very conquest as extending from the capes of ᚗᚗᚱ᚟᚟ᚉ and ᚗᚨᚱ᚟᚟ᚉ entirely across all Guinea and beyond, towards that southern shore, as well as to have heeded and belonged to, and to be obliged to heed and belong in after time to the very King Alfonso and his successors, and the infant, and not to any one else. And certainly he determined and declared the aforesaid King Alfonso and successors, and the infant, able to make whatever prohibitions, statutes, and mandates, as well as penalties, in those places and around them, and with the application of whatever tax, and also to dispose and arrange those very places as they would their own things and properties. And also, for the support of a preferable law of caution, he perpetually gave, granted, and appropriated the provinces, islands, ports, locales, and seas so acquired, and those which would have happened to be acquired in after time, wherever, however many, and of whatever kind they would be, and the very conquest from the capes of ᚗᚗᚱ᚟᚟ᚉ and ᚗᚨᚱ᚟᚟ᚉ to the aforesaid King Alfonso and the succeeding kings of the said kingdoms, and also the aforementioned infant. Moreover, since it were in many ways advantageous for such a work to be carried out, that the aforesaid King Alfonso and successors, and also the infant, not to mention persons whom they would conduct in this, or anyone whom those to be committed would conduct, were able to make purchases and sales concerning whatever things and goods and victuals, not to mention to enter into whatever contracts, trade, deal, and do business, and to market whatever wares to the places of those very Muslims and infidels, provided that they were not iron tools, bandages, rope, ships, or kinds of armature, and to sell them to the said Muslims and infidels, as well as to do, perform, or work at each and every other thing advantageous or necessary to the above, and around it, that which was granted to the said King John by Martin V of happy recollection, and among others indulged also King Edward of celebrated memory, progenitor of the same King Alfonso of the same kingdoms, by Eugene IV of pious memory, our predecessor Roman pontiffs, towards the said parts with any Muslims and unbelievers whatsoever. And the very King Alfonso, successors, and infant, he decreed would be able to found, and also make to be founded and built through them, whatever churches, monasteries, and other pious places in the provinces, islands, and locales already acquired, and those yet to be acquired. Not to mention to send to those places whatever willing persons, ecclesiastical, secular, and of any of the canonical mendicant orders, though only with the permission of their superiors. And these same persons also to remain therein so long as they would live, and to hear the confessions of any one existing in or chancing through said parts, and, having heard these, to dispense the owed absolution in all cases except those reserved for the aforesaid seat, and also to impose redeeming penance, not to mention to administer the ecclesiastical sacraments. This he granted and bestowed upon the same Alfonso and his successor kings of Portugal, who would be in aftertime, and the aforesaid infant. And indeed he beseeched the Lord that every individual faithful to Christ, ecclesiastical, secular, and of whatever canonical orders, of whatever status, grade, order, condition, and preeminence, would have been set up everywhere across the globe, even if they shone forth with archbishoply, bishoply, imperial, kingly, queenly, or ducal, or whatever other greater ecclesiastical or worldly, dignity, and he exhorted them by the sprinkling of the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, whose sake was in question, as above, and he imposed such on them for the forgiveness of their sins. Furthermore, by an edict of perpetual forbiddance, he strictly prohibited arms, iron, bandages, and other things forbidden by law to the Muslims to be marketed to such provinces, islands, ports, seas, and whatever other places acquired, either possessed or conquered, in the name of King Alfonso, by any means. Or also, without the special license of the very King Alfonso and his successors, and the infant, they would not have been able to legally market wares and other exports, or to fish in those parts, or to involve themselves concerning the provinces, islands, ports, seas, and locales of those parts, or anything else of theirs, or otherwise concerning such conquest. Or to do anything themselves, or through another, or others, directly or indirectly, by deed or design, through which King Alfonso and his successors, and the aforesaid infant, would not have been able to occupy the acquired and possessed places peacefully, and pursue and perform such conquest, or to otherwise impede such by any means. Anyone who would in truth have done the opposite, he wished punished for this very fact, to incur the penalties published by law against marketing arms and any other forbidden things to the Muslims. If the people were individuals, they would have incurred the sentence of excommunication, If a community, or the whole of a city, encampment, village, or place, that very city, encampment, village, or place would have been subject to church interdiction by that same fact, neither would those acting against this very order, or any of them, have been absolved from the sentence of excommunication, nor would they have been able to obtain apostolic, or any other authorities, relaxation of such interdiction, unless they would have suitably satisfied the very Alfonso and his successors, and also the infant, concerning the above, or else have amicably agreed with the same above. What is more, the aforementioned predecessor gave mandates in his letters for our venerable brothers the Archbishop of Lisbon and the bishops of Silves and Ceuta, such that those same, or else two or one of them, either himself or through another or others, were, by apostolic authority, as often as they, or any one of them, would have been requested on the part of the aforesaid King Alfonso and those successors, and also the infant, or any one of them, to declare and announce those who would have been fit to incur such sentences of excommunication and interdiction to have been, and to be bound by the said excommunications, interdictions, and other penalties, kept from churches on such times as Sundays and other festive days when a great multitude of people would have come together therein before the divine. And of course they were to make it to be announced by others that these were to be more strictly shunned by all until they would have satisfied or agreed with the above, as stated above. Contradictors to be restrained through church censure and by disregarded appeals. Not to be obstructed by apostolic regulations and orders or anything else contrary whatsoever. As for the rest, lest the said records, which emanated from the same predecessor out of certain knowledge and mature deliberation previously held on the above, as stated above, have been able to be attacked by anyone in aftertime by the vice of subreption or obreption, or else that of nullity, he wished, and by the aforesaid authority, knowledge, and power he decided as much, and he declared, that the said records and their content might no wise have been able to be attacked by subreption, obreption, or by nullity, or likewise extraordinarily by whatever other power, or else by any other failing, nor hindered or slowed by the outcome of those, but that they would remain sound in perpetuity and obtain the full firmness of the oak. Also, it were invalid and pointless if it would have happened to be tried by anyone, knowingly or unknowingly, through whatever authority, to pollute contrarily over these. And from thence it was set out by our other predecessor, Pope Callist III of pious memory, for the sake of the aforesaid King Alfonso and infant Henry, which same overly affected a mood for spirituality in the same solitary islands, lands, ports, and places existing in the ocean sea facing the southern shore in Guinea, which the same infant, by strength of arms, had wrested from out of the hands of the Muslims and conquered for the Christian religion, as stated above, that this were to be perpetually granted through the apostolic seat to the military of Jesus Christ, by the help of whose prophets the same infant was given credit for having made such a conquest. And this declaration, constitution, rendering, permission, appropriation, decree, supplication, exhortation, injunction, inhibition, mandate, and will was to be confirmed, not to mention the letters of the aforementioned predecessor Nicholas, and each and every point contained therein. The same Callist proceeding, attendant on the said army's religion in the same islands, lands, and places, able to offer up salutary proceeds before the Lord, and being inclined to such supplications, confirmed and approved such declaration, constitution, rendering, appropriation, decree, entreaty, exhortation, injunction, inhibition, mandate, will, letters, and contents, and whatever were judged to have followed from thence and has a pleasing aspect, each and every such point, by apostolic authority, and out of like knowledge, and he resolved to support them with the hardihood of perpetual firmness, making up for each and every failing, if any should by chance have occurred in the same. And he none the less perpetually determined, fixed, and ordained by the aforesaid authority and knowledge that he wished the spiritual authority and every kind of ordinary jurisdiction, the domain and purview concerning spirituality encompassing the extent of the aforesaid islands, villages, ports, lands, and places, from the capes of Bojador and Naon, entirely throughout all Guinea, and beyond that southern shore all the way up to the Indies, the places acquired and yet to be acquired, whatever their locations, number, characteristics, vernaculars, designations, borders, and neighboring lands, be regarded expressly according to his letters, that they would heed and belong to the said army and order throughout all times yet to be, and he granted and bestowed these upon them from then on. Thus, for the time being, the prior major of the said army's order would confer and provide for each and every ecclesiastical benefice, of whatever quality and worth, whether cum cura or sine cura, secular or of any of the canonical orders, that existed or would have come to be in the aforesaid islands, lands, and places founded and set up, or yet to be founded and set up, however often those positions would have happened to become vacant in the future. And of course he were to handle the pronouncement of excommunications, suspensions, privations, interdictions, and other ecclesiastical sentences, censures, and penalties, however often the need would have arisen, going by the nature of the matters and affairs besetting him at a given time. And in likewise he would be able to do, dispose, and carry out each and every other such task as the local ordinaries would be considered to have spiritual authority over, by law or by customary right, as is their wont, without any difference. He granted this faculty over each and every such matter, full and free, declaring the islands, lands, and places acquired and yet to be acquired in such wise to belong to no diocese, and it would have been null and void if anything should have happened to be tried otherwise concerning these matters, knowingly or unknowingly, by any one whatsoever. Verily, afterwards, when war had for some time broken out between the aforesaid King Alfonso and our most beloved son in Christ Ferdinand, illustrious King of Castile and Leon and their subjects, caused by the cunning of the enemy of the human race, at last, by the work of divine mercy, they came to peace and agreement, and made several chapters among themselves for peace to be strengthened and stayed between each other, among which one chapter is to be discerned of such provision. Further, the aforesaid King and Queen of Castile, Aragon, and Sicily wished and were pleased that this peace would be firm and stable, and to last forever. They promised that from now on, and in the future, they will neither disturb, harass, nor interfere with, neither through themselves nor through another, secretly or publicly, nor through their heirs and successors, by deed or by law, judicially or extrajudicially, the said lords the King and Prince of Portugal, nor the kings who will rule over the said kingdom of Portugal in the future, nor their kingdoms concerning the possession and quasi-possession they are engaged in, with respect to all commerce, lands, and exchanges, or cessions of Guinea with its mines or gold deposits, and whatever other islands, strands, or sea-coasts, lands found or yet to be found, discovered and yet to be discovered, the islands of Madeira, Porto Santo, and the Desertas Islands, and all the said islands of the Azores, that is, of the Hawks, and the island of Flores, as well as in the islands of Cabo Verde, that is, the Green Cape, and in the islands which they have presently discovered, and whatever islands which will be hereafter discovered and acquired in the proximity of Guinea, apart from the islands of the Canaries, beyond and on the nearer side, such that anything that is discovered or will be discovered and acquired beyond the said limits, such that what is discovered and found shall remain to the said King and Prince of Portugal and their kingdoms, excepting only the islands of the Canaries, Lanzarote, La Palma, Fuerteventura, La Gomera, El Hierro, La Graciosa, Gran Canaria, Tenerife, and all other islands of the Canaries acquired or yet to be acquired, which remain to the kingdoms of Castile. And thus they will neither disturb, harass, nor interfere with any persons who will trade or negotiate such merchandise and contracts to Guinea, nor to the said lands and strands or coasts discovered and yet to be discovered in the name or by the power and hand of the said lords the King and Prince of Portugal or their successors, or acquire, by whatever title or mode, means by which this would or could be so. Indeed, through this present text they promise and assert in good faith, without bad wile, to the said lords the King and Prince of Portugal and their successors, that they will not send, through themselves or through others, nor will they consent to such, but rather shall they defend that they shall not go to trade in the said commerce and tracts without the permission of the said lords the King and Prince of Portugal, their own natural peoples or subjects to the islands and lands of Guinea discovered or yet to be discovered, in whatever place and in whatever time and in whatever case expected or unexpected, nor would they arm whatever other foreign peoples who might be staying in their kingdoms and dominions, or islands and ports, or furnish them with victuals or necessities for sailing, nor will they give to those same any occasion, favor, place, aid, or assent, directly or indirectly, nor will they permit them to be armed or loaded up to go thither in any way. And if there should be anyone from among the citizens or subjects of the kingdoms of Castile, or whatever foreigners, who would go to trade, impede, damage, plunder, or explore in the said Guinea, and in the said places of commerce and exchanges, and of mines or gold deposits, and to lands and islands which are discovered and to be discovered in the future, without the permission of express consent of the said lords the King and Prince of Portugal or their successors, that such are to be punished in the mode, place, and form that is ordained by the said chapter of this new reformation. The peace treaty which will be maintained, and must be maintained, in maritime matters against those who disembark onto the strands and ports to plunder, damage, or work ill, or who would make the said things happen in the middle of the sea. Because of this, the King and Queen of Castile and Leon have promised and granted in the above said way, through themselves and their successors, that they shall not involve themselves in any way in the inquiry and efforts towards the conquest of the kingdom of Fez, just as their ancestors, the past kings of Castile, did not involve themselves. Instead, the said lords, the King and Prince of Portugal, and their kingdoms and their successors, will be able to freely pursue said conquest, and they shall defend it however it pleases them, and the said lords, the King and Queen of Castile, have promised and consented in all this. Neither through themselves nor through others, neither judicially nor extrajudicially, neither by deed nor by law, will they move any litigation, doubt, inquiry, or condemnation concerning the above, neither in part nor concerning a matter which might pertain to it. Instead, they will preserve and fulfill the entirety with integrity, and they will make it to be observed without any failing, nor would ignorance of the disclosures and penalties of the said things contracted be able to be pled in aftertime. The said lords immediately sent to the judges and officials of their kingdom's ports that they shall preserve and fulfill and faithfully execute all that is here said, and shall send it to be proclaimed and published in their court, and in the said seaports of their above said kingdoms and dominions, so that it shall reach their notice. We, therefore, to whom the care of the Lord's universal flock is committed from heaven, and who, as we are bound, want the sweetness of peace and quiet to thrive and last perpetually among Christian princes and peoples, desiring that such letters of Nicholas and Callist proceeding, and the afore-inserted chapter, not to mention each and every one of their contents, might endure forever, perpetually firm and unspoiled, for the praise of the divine name and the everlasting peace of the princes and peoples of each aforesaid kingdom. By our own motion, not at anyone's insistence of a petition offered to us concerning this, but from our sheer generosity and providence, and out of certain knowledge, not to mention from the fullness of apostolic power, we, holding such letters of Nicholas and Callist proceeding, and also the aforesaid chapter, as fixed and pleasing, approve and confirm those same, not to mention each and every point contained therein, by apostolic authority and through the tenor of the present letters, and we fortify them through the patronage of the present writ, decreeing them, each and every one, to obtain the full firmness of strength, and to be perpetually observed. And we nonetheless mandate through apostolic writs to the venerable brothers, the bishops of Elvas and Silves, and also of Guarda, by like motion and knowledge, that they, or else two or one of them, through themselves or another, or others, are, when and where it would be necessary, to solemnly proclaim every one of the aforesaid letters and chapter, assisting the same King and Prince of Portugal and their successors through the presidents of effective defense in each and every of the above points. They shall not permit the same king and prince and successors to be harassed or impeded from any or all of the foregoing by any one whatsoever, of whatever dignity, status, rank, or condition they might be. Harassers and impeders, not to mention any contradictors and rebels against our authority, to be restrained by disregarded appeal. Notwithstanding everything said above, or if anyone, jointly or separately, were to be indulged by the apostolic seat, that they are not able to be interdicted, suspended, or excommunicated by apostolic letters not making full, express, word-for-word mention of such indulgence. No one, therefore, of all humanity may be allowed to infringe this document of our confirmation, approval, fortification, constitution, and mandate, or go against it by reckless venture. If, moreover, anyone would try to defile this, he will have incurred on himself the indignation of omnipotent God and of his blessed apostles Peter and Paul, given at Rome before Holy Peter in the 1481st year of the incarnation of the Lord, on the 11th kalends of July, in the 10th year of our pontificate, 21st of June of 1481.